That's my father's rifle, and it's time to finish what he started. Deep in the Colorado wilderness, retired Navy SEAL sniper Janet Phoenix Coulson thought she'd left her deadly past behind. But when a desperate message revealed the shocking truth about her father's death, this legendary marksman had to pick up her rifle one last time. What she discovered would lead to the most impossible shot of her career, a 1,400-meter precision strike that would determine the fate of 200 innocent children held by the monster who destroyed her family. In a world where every bullet counts, sometimes the hardest target to hit is justice itself. This is the story of a daughter's promise, a warrior's redemption, and a shot that echoed across 2 decades of pain. Like and subscribe to witness the most incredible true story of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter that transcends death itself. The Ghost of Montana. When a Navy SEAL sniper discovered her father's murder, the Colorado wind carried the scent of pine and regret across the Coulson Ranch, where Janet Phoenix Coulson knelt beside her father's grave for the third time this week. At 40 years old, her hands still moved with the precise efficiency of a Navy SEAL, placing fresh wildflowers on the granite headstone that read, "Colonel Robert Coulson, Medal of Honor, recipient beloved father." But the inscription felt like a lie, now carved in stone, to hide the truth she was beginning to suspect. 5 years had passed since Janet traded her sniper rifle for a life of isolation on the family ranch. 5 years since the nightmares from her final mission in Afghanistan had driven her from the teams. 5 years since she'd convinced herself that the colonel had died in a simple helicopter training accident, just as the official report claimed. But as dawn painted the Rocky Mountains gold, Janet couldn't shake the feeling that her father's ghost was trying to tell her something. The ranch sprawled across 10,000 acres of pristine wilderness, a fortress of solitude, where Janet had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a horse. Her father had built it as a sanctuary, but it had become her prison. Every morning she walked the same paths they'd once shared, her boots following trails worn by decades of father-daughter training sessions that had shaped her into the deadliest female sniper in SEAL history. 132 confirmed kills, a record that meant nothing now in the silence of the mountains. Her routine never varied. Dawn patrol of the property perimeter, maintenance of the shooting range her father had built into the hillside, feeding the horses he'd trained, reading the military journals he'd collected, living in the shadow of a man whose legacy grew heavier with each passing day. The locals in nearby Boulder called her a hero, but Sarah knew better. Heroes didn't retire at 35. Heroes didn't hide from the world when people still needed saving. The satellite phone's piercing ring shattered the morning stillness like a sniper's bullet. Janet's hand instinctively moved to her hip, where her sidearm once rested, muscle memory from a decade of deployments flooding back. The device lay on the kitchen table where she'd left it the night before, its military-grade encryption making it virtually untraceable. Only 3 people had this number, and 2 of them were supposed to be dead. "This better be good, Walker," Janet answered, recognizing the scrambled digits that meant her former commanding officer was calling through multiple relay points. But the voice that responded wasn't Colonel James Walker's familiar growl. It was weaker, desperate, filtered through what sounded like interference from halfway around the world. "Sarah, if you're getting this message, then I'm either dead or wish I was." Marcus Kane, her spotter, her partner through 19 missions in 4 different war zones. The man who'd taught her that patience was a sniper's greatest weapon and that every shot carried the weight of consequences. Janet's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the voice she hadn't heard in 5 years. "Marcus," she whispered, but the message continued without pause. "I'm being held somewhere near the Mexican border. Maybe Texas. Victor Kozlov has me." "Yeah, you heard that right. The ghost from your father's past isn't dead after all. And Janet, he knows about you. He knows about what the colonel was really working on before he died. If you're listening to this, then the dead man's switch I built into my gear worked, and you're about to learn some ugly truths." The phone trembled in Janet's grip. Victor Kozlov, a name from her father's classified files mentioned in whispered conversations between the colonel and his fellow veterans. A former Spetsnaz officer who'd supposedly died in a Siberian prison 20 years ago. But if Marcus was right, if Victor was alive and had her spotter, "Your father didn't die in any training accident, Phoenix. He was murdered because he got too close to something big." Victor Kozlov runs the largest human trafficking network in North America, maybe the world. Kids, Janet. Hundreds of them. And the colonel was about to expose the whole damn thing when they took him out. Made it look like mechanical failure in that helicopter crash. Janet's legs gave out. She collapsed into her father's favorite chair, the worn leather creaking under her weight. The official report had been clean professional final. Mechanical failure during a routine training flight. No witnesses, no survivors, no questions that couldn't be answered with bureaucratic efficiency. But now, as Marcus's words echoed in her mind, every detail that had never quite fit began to make terrible sense. There's more, and you're not going to like it. I've been tracking Victor for 2 years following leads the colonel left behind. This isn't just about money or power. This son of a bitch, Weich, is building something bigger. Training camps where he breaks kids down and builds them back up as weapons. Living weapons he sells to the highest bidder. Governments, cartels, terror groups. Anyone with enough cash and a taste for the kind of damage only a child soldier can deliver. The mountain air felt thin, insufficient. Janet's chest tightened as images flashed through her mind. Her father's late-night phone calls. His increasingly frequent trips to Washington. The way he'd started looking over his shoulder during their last conversation 3 weeks before his death. She'd attributed it to the stress of command, the weight of sending young soldiers into harm's way. But now she understood. He'd been hunting a monster, and the monster had found him first. I'm uploading everything to your secure server. Maps, financial records, names you'll recognize from the evening news. Victor's client list reads like a who's who of untouchable bastards. But here's the thing, Janet. I think I found his primary facility. Texas-Mexico border about 70 miles southwest of El Paso. If my intel's right, he's holding close to 200 kids there. Kids who'll disappear forever if someone doesn't act fast. 200 children. Janet's mind automatically calculated the logistics. Extraction routes, personnel requirements, equipment needed. Even in civilian clothes, 5 years removed from active duty, her tactical brain was already planning the impossible. But planning was different from executing, and execution required resources she no longer had access to. Official channels would take months, assuming anyone believed Marcus's story. Unofficial channels meant going rogue, burning bridges, becoming the kind of operator her father had always warned her about. I know what you're thinking. Walk away. Call Walker. Let the proper authorities handle it. But there are no proper authorities for this Phoenix. Victor's reach goes too high, runs too deep. He's got judges, senators, maybe people inside the Pentagon. The only reason the colonel got as far as he did was because he worked alone, trusted no one, kept everything compartmentalized. And it still got him killed. Marcus's voice grew weaker, more urgent. Look in your father's study, behind the Medal of Honor display case. He left something for you, Janet. Something he said you'd need if this day ever came. I don't know what it is, but he made me promise to tell you if anything happened to him. Said his little girl would understand when the time was right. The line crackled with static, distant voices shouting in Spanish. Time's up. They're coming back. Janet, if you decide to come for me, don't. This isn't about saving one washed-up sniper. It's about stopping a cancer that's been spreading for 20 years. Your father died trying to cut it out. Maybe it's time his daughter finished the job. Semper Fi Phoenix. The connection died, leaving Janet alone with the weight of revelation and the echo of Marcus's last words. Phoenix, her call sign from the teams, earned through a combination of patience, precision, and the unsettling ability to rise from the ashes of impossible situations. Marcus had been the only person besides her father who truly understood what that name represented. Not just skill with a rifle, but the capacity to become something more than human when the mission demanded it. Janet stood slowly, her muscles protesting 5 years of relative inactivity. But beneath the stiffness, she felt something else stirring. The old hunger, the clarity that came with purpose. The knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, children were suffering while their captors slept safely behind walls and wire. It was the kind of wrongness that had driven her to the teams in the first place, the same sense of justice that had motivated her father's lifetime of service. The study was exactly as the colonel had left it. Awards and commendations lined the walls, testament to a career spent in service to country and principle. But Janet's attention focused on the Medal of Honor display case, the glass reflecting her face like a mirror. She'd always assumed the case was solid, a simple frame for her father's highest decoration. But as her fingers probed the edges, she found the hidden catch Marcus had described. The back panel swung open silently, revealing a compartment she'd never known existed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a leather journal and a small digital drive. But it was the third item that stopped her breath entirely. A rifle broken down into components, each piece crafted with the precision of a master gunsmith. Her father's personal weapon, the Barrett M82, that had made him legendary in special operations circles. Janet's hands shook as she assembled the rifle with practiced efficiency. The weight distribution was perfect, the balance absolute. Every surface had been hand-fitted, every component tuned for maximum accuracy at extreme range. It was more than a weapon. It was a legacy passed down from a man who'd used it to protect democracy in places most Americans couldn't pronounce. The journal's pages revealed her father's deepest fears and highest hopes. Page after page of meticulous notes, surveillance photos, financial records, and organizational charts that painted a picture of systematic evil. Viktor Kozlov's network spread across 3 continents, its tentacles reaching into every level of society. Judges who ensured light sentences for trafficking charges. Politicians who blocked investigations. Military contractors who provided weapons and training. All of it held together by fear, money, and the kind of corruption that thrived in darkness. But it was the final entry that broke her heart. 3 weeks before his death, her father had written, "Janet will hate me for keeping this from her, but some battles are too dangerous for the people you love. If she reads this, it means I failed." Victor won something he shouldn't have won. But maybe failure isn't the end. Maybe it's just the beginning of someone else's fight. My little girl became a warrior I never could be. If anyone can finish this, it's her. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the study when Janet finally closed the journal. Marcus's words echoed in her mind, mixing with her father's hopes and her own growing certainty. The proper authorities couldn't or wouldn't act fast enough. 200 children didn't have time for bureaucracy and political maneuvering. They had only what Janet Coulson could give them, the skills of a trained killer and the conscience of a soldier who'd sworn to protect the innocent. The secure satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Colonel Walker. Marcus Kane's beacon went active 8 hours ago. Last known position 40 miles southwest of El Paso, Texas. No official mission authorized. Repeat, no official mission authorized. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you'll be on your own. But that's never stopped a Coulson before. The message continued with tactical information that would have taken Walker considerable risk to obtain. Satellite imagery of a fortified compound, guard rotations, vehicle counts, supply schedules, everything a sniper would need to plan an impossible mission in territory controlled by an enemy who'd killed her father and now held her spotter. Walker was giving her what she needed while maintaining plausible deniability. It was the kind of support that came only from a lifetime of mutual trust and shared values. As the evening approached, Janet began her preparations. Equipment checks, route planning, mission parameters. The familiar rhythm of pre-deployment preparation settled over her like a comfortable uniform. But this time was different. This time she wasn't just another trigger puller in a larger machine. This time she was the entire mission. The success or failure of 200 children's rescue would rest entirely on her shoulders. The Barrett M82 required special consideration. At 29 pounds, it was too heavy for extended carry operations. But its effective range of over 2,000 meters made it the perfect weapon for precision elimination of high-value targets. Sarah's father had modified the rifle's bipod and scope mount, allowing for rapid deployment in a variety of terrain conditions. More importantly, he'd hand-loaded ammunition specifically for the weapon, each cartridge designed for maximum accuracy at extreme range. The Colorado wind picked up as darkness fell, carrying the sound of wolves from the high country. Janet stood on her father's porch, the Barrett cradled in her arms, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Somewhere to the south, Marcus Kane was probably counting the same stars, wondering if anyone had received his message. Wondering if help was coming or if he'd die alone in a foreign place, another casualty in a war most people didn't even know was being fought. But Janet knew. She'd always known, even when she tried to convince herself otherwise. Some wars never ended. They just waited for the next generation of warriors to pick up the weapons and carry on the fight. Her father had understood that Truth had spent his life serving it. Now it was her turn to honor the legacy he'd built, the promise he'd made, the children who needed someone to stand between them and the monsters that hunted in the darkness. The ranch would survive without her. The horses would find new owners. The land would endure as it always had, patient and eternal under the Colorado sky. But 24 hours from now, Janet Phoenix Coulson would be gone, carrying her father's rifle toward a reckoning that had been 20 years in the making. Viktor Kozlov had taken her father's life, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd left the daughter alive, and now she was coming home to finish what he'd started. The last entry in Janet's deployment log was simple. Mission rescue 200 children from human trafficking network. Primary target, Viktor Kozlov. Expected casualties high. Probability of success unknown. Reason for acceptance, some promises are worth dying for. She signed it with her call sign Phoenix and added her father's motto beneath, when justice calls, warriors answer. The war was beginning again, and Janet Coulson was going back to the place she'd been born to occupy. Not behind a ranch fence in Colorado, but in the crosshairs of justice where precise violence served a purpose greater than any individual life. Her father's legacy wasn't the Medal of Honor gathering dust in a display case. It was the knowledge that someone would always stand watch, would always answer the call, would always be willing to pay the price that freedom demanded. Marcus's message had awakened something in Janet that 5 years of isolation couldn't kill. The certainty that she was exactly who she was supposed to be, in exactly the place she was meant to be, at exactly the moment history demanded her presence. The ghost of the Colorado mountains was about to become flesh again, and Viktor Kozlov was about to learn why the Coulson family had never backed down from a fight worth fighting. As the Colorado night deepened around her, Janet Coulson began loading her gear for what might be her final mission. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt truly alive. 24 hours after receiving Marcus's message, Janet Coulson sat in a weathered diner outside Fort Bliss, Texas, watching Colonel James Walker dissect a chicken fried steak with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to enemy positions. At 62, Walker remained the kind of officer who inspired loyalty through competence rather than charisma. His weathered face bore the scars of 3 decades in special operations, each line a testament to decisions made in places where hesitation meant death. "You look like hell, Coulson," Walker said, without looking up from his plate. "5 years of civilian life hasn't been kind to you." Janet sipped her black coffee, studying the man who'd shaped her military career from promising recruit to legendary operator. Walker had been her father's closest friend, the one person Colonel Coulson had trusted with his deepest concerns about Viktor Kozlov's growing network. If anyone knew the full extent of what they were facing, it would be him. "Marcus is alive," Janet said simply. "Kozlov has him." "I know." Walker finally raised his eyes, and Janet saw something she'd never seen before: uncertainty. "Satellite picked up his beacon 14 hours ago. Compound about 70 miles southwest of here, right where your father suspected it would be." But Janet, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this table. Officially, Marcus Kane died in Afghanistan 5 years ago. Officially, you're a retired veteran with no current military status. Officially, this conversation never happened. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Walker was offering her something governments couldn't provide: the truth unfiltered by political considerations or bureaucratic limitations. But truth came with a price. Once she heard it, she'd be fully committed to a path with no official backup and no legal protection. "Tell me," Janet said. Walker reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila folder marked with classification levels that shouldn't exist outside of secure facilities. "Your father wasn't just investigating human trafficking. He'd stumbled onto something bigger. Viktor Kozlov isn't just running a criminal enterprise. He's building a private army." The photographs Walker spread across the table showed children in military fatigues carrying weapons too large for their small frames, training facilities that looked more like military academies than criminal hideouts, instructors with the bearing of professional soldiers teaching tactics to kids who should have been playing with toys instead of assault rifles. "Child soldiers?" Janet asked, though she already knew the answer. "Worse, these kids aren't being trained for some African warlord or Middle Eastern insurgency. They're being prepared for operations inside the United States. Sleeper agents who can pass as refugees, runaways, exchange students." Kids so traumatized and conditioned that they'll follow orders without question, strike targets without hesitation, then disappear back into the population. Janet's coffee turned cold as she absorbed the implications. A network of child operatives scattered across the country waiting for activation signals that might never come, or might come tomorrow triggered by events beyond anyone's control. It was asymmetric warfare taken to its logical extreme, using society's most protected population as weapons against it itself. How many, she asked. We think he's deployed over 400 in the last 5 years, maybe more. Your father had identified cells in 14 major cities before he was killed. Atlanta, Chicago, Phoenix, Miami. Kids living normal lives until they received the call to become something else entirely. Walker pulled out another photograph, this one showing a young girl, perhaps 9 years old, with dead eyes that belonged on a much older face. This is Emma Rodriguez, taken from a school playground in San Antonio 4 months ago, daughter of Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, Force Recon. The name hit Janet like a physical blow. Carlos Rodriguez, one of the finest Marines she'd ever worked alongside, a demolitions expert who could place charges with surgical precision. She'd heard he'd left the Corps after his daughter's kidnapping had gone off the grid, pursuing leads the FBI couldn't or wouldn't follow. Carlos is alive. Barely. He's been hunting Victor on his own, burning through savings and favors trying to track down his little girl. Lost his wife to the stress, nearly lost his sanity. But he's gathered intelligence none of our official sources could access. Street-level stuff, names, faces, locations. Walker's next revelation came with a photograph that made Janet's blood run cold. Victor Kozlov, older now, but unmistakably the same face from her father's classified files. Standing beside him was a woman with calculating eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to violence. Behind them, barely visible in the background, stood children in military formation. Elena Vasquez, former Mexican intelligence turned mercenary after her unit was wiped out by cartel violence. She's Victor's recruiting specialist. Identifies vulnerable children, arranges their disappearance, oversees their initial conditioning. According to our sources, she's personally responsible for over 500 kidnappings across North America. Janet studied Elena's face, memorizing every detail. In her experience, the most dangerous enemies were often those who'd started on the right side before circumstances pushed them across the line. Lena would be smart, experienced, and motivated by something deeper than money. That made her unpredictable and therefore deadly. There's more, Walker continued. 3 weeks ago, one of Victor's cells was activated. Phoenix, a 13-year-old boy, walked into a federal courthouse with a backpack full of explosives. Security caught him before he could detonate, but the kid wouldn't talk, wouldn't even tell them his real name. Just kept repeating coordinates in Russian until he went completely catatonic. The coordinates led to a warehouse that had been emptied hours before federal agents arrived. But the few pieces of evidence left behind painted a picture of industrial-scale child conditioning, medical equipment designed for psychological manipulation, training materials that covered everything from weapons handling to assassination techniques, and a shipping schedule that has suggested Victor was preparing for his largest operation yet. He's moving the kids out of the country, Janet realized, getting ready to activate his existing cells while establishing new ones overseas. That's what your father believed. And it's why Victor killed him when he got too close. But Robert left us one advantage his murderer doesn't know about. He documented everything. Financial networks, supply chains, personnel files. It's all on the drive he left for you. Walker's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. His expression darkened as he read it. Satellite imagery from 8 hours ago. Victor's compound is showing increased activity. Vehicle movements suggest preparation for a major operation. If Marcus was right about the 200 kids being held there, they're probably being prepared for transport. The timeline was collapsing faster than Janet had anticipated. Every hour they delayed increased the chance that the children would be moved to a location they might never find. But rushing into a fortified compound without proper reconnaissance was suicide, and suicide wouldn't save anyone. I need backup, Janet said. Someone good with a rifle. Already ahead of you. Walker slid a business card across the table. Rebecca Sterling, 28 years old, Marine Scout sniper, currently between assignments after her last unit was disbanded for asking inconvenient questions about civilian casualties in Syria. She's good, Janet. Not as good as you, but good enough to watch your back. The card bore only a phone number and a single word, Overwatch. Janet pocketed it, already running tactical calculations. A two-person sniper team would be vulnerable but fast, capable of precision strikes that larger units couldn't achieve. If Rebecca Sterling was half as skilled as Walker claimed, they might have a chance. What about Carlos Rodriguez? He's already in El Paso, has been for a week, running surveillance on Victor's operation, mapping guard rotations, looking for a way inside. If you're serious about this, you'll need his expertise. But Janet, Walker's voice carried a warning, Carlos isn't the same Marine you knew. Losing Emma broke something inside him. He's operating on pure rage now, and rage makes people do stupid things. Janet understood. She'd seen what grief could do to trained operators, how the loss of something precious could transform discipline into recklessness. But she'd also seen how that same rage could fuel superhuman performance when properly channeled. Carlos Rodriguez was a risk, but he was also their best source of current intelligence. Set up a meeting, she said, tonight. Walker nodded and began gathering the photographs. One more thing. This operation officially doesn't exist. If you are captured, if you're killed, if this goes sideways in any way, you'll be disavowed. No government will acknowledge your actions. No agency will claim responsibility. You'll be just another veteran who couldn't adjust to civilian life and decided to play soldier one more time. Understood. I don't think you do. Walker's voice carried the weight of experience. Your father died trying to stop Victor. Marcus is probably dead already, and you know it. The kids you're trying to save might be beyond saving. This whole operation could be a trap designed to eliminate the last person who poses a threat to Victor's network. Are you really willing to throw your life away for a mission that might be impossible? Janet stood, leaving money on the table for coffee she hadn't finished. The question Walker asked was the same one that had driven her to isolation in Colorado 5 years earlier. Was any mission worth the price it demanded? Was any cause greater than the life of the person serving it? She'd answered no, once had chosen self-preservation over service. But that decision had haunted every day since. My father believed some fights were worth dying for, she said. Maybe it's time I found out if he was right. The meeting with Rebecca Sterling took place at a roadside motel outside El Paso, the kind of location that provided clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. Janet arrived early, studying the terrain with eyes trained to spot threats and opportunities. The building showed signs of recent occupation, fresh tire tracks, cigarette butts, the subtle indicators that someone had been using it as a staging area. Rebecca emerged from a room at the far end of the building, moving with the measured gait of someone trained to approach unknown situations with appropriate caution. At 28, she possessed the lean build of a dedicated shooter, hands steady, and eyes that missed nothing. But it was the way she carried herself that convinced Janet she might survive what they were about to attempt. Ma'am, Rebecca said simply, offering a brief handshake. Colonel Walker filled me in on the basics. Orders are to provide Overwatch support for a hostage extraction in denied territory. Janet studied the younger woman, looking for signs of the recklessness that often accompanied youth in combat situations. But Rebecca's eyes held the kind of steady intelligence that came from surviving situations where mistakes meant death. Her service record, according to Walker, included 43 confirmed kills across 2 deployments, with a longest shot of 1,600 meters in variable wind conditions. You ever kill anyone to save children? Janet asked. 19 confirmed in Syria, Rebecca replied without hesitation. Most were snipers targeting refugee convoys. One was a suicide bomber heading for a school. Janet nodded approvingly. Combat experience was essential, but the specific nature of Rebecca's kills suggested something more important. She understood that precision shooting was ultimately about protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. That moral clarity would be crucial for what they were about to face. The meeting with Carlos Rodriguez took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of El Paso, the kind of location that provided clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. Janet arrived to find the building already occupied by equipment that spoke of serious surveillance operations. Military-grade optics communication gear, tactical maps marked with notations in Spanish and English. Carlos had been preparing for a one-man assault on Victor's compound, gathering intelligence, with the methodical patience of a professional soldier driven by personal demons. Carlos emerged from the shadows like a ghost, but Janet's trained eye caught the slight tremor in his hands that hadn't been there 5 years ago. He'd lost weight, his face carved into sharp angles by stress and sleepless nights, but his eyes still held the intelligence and determination that had made him invaluable in combat situations. "Janet Coulson," he said simply, "heard you'd retired to civilian life. So did you until 4 months ago." Carlos's laugh held no humor. "Retirement's a luxury for people who don't have unfinished business. You hear about Marcus. I'm here about the kids. All of them." Carlos led her deeper into the warehouse past equipment that spoke of serious surveillance operations. Military-grade optics communication gear, tactical maps marked with notations that showed weeks of careful observation. He'd been preparing for a one-man assault on Victor's compound, gathering intelligence with the methodical patience of a professional soldier. 237 children, Carlos said, pointing to a satellite photograph. Ages 6 to 17, taken from 14 countries over the past 5 years. Victor's got them divided into training cohorts based on age and aptitude. The younger ones are conditioned for infiltration missions. Older kids get weapons training, tactical instruction, psychological conditioning. The photographs Carlos had taken with telephoto lenses showed children moving through military drills with the precision of seasoned soldiers. But Janet's experienced eye caught details that civilian observers might miss: the listless way the kids held their weapons, the absence of normal childhood energy, the hollow expressions that spoke of systematic trauma. "They're drugged," she realized. "Pharmaceutical conditioning to suppress natural resistance. Ketamine and synthetic compounds we can't identify. Keeps them compliant during training, makes them susceptible to psychological manipulation. By the time they're deployed, they're not really children anymore. They're organic robots programmed to follow orders." Carlos's voice carried the controlled fury of a father who'd seen his child's innocence stolen by monsters who traded in human suffering. Janet had witnessed that same transformation in other operators who'd lost family to violence. It was the point where grief became purpose, where personal loss evolved into mission focus. "Security?" Janet asked. 42 guards rotating 12-hour shifts. Former military, mostly Eastern European mercenaries with combat experience. "They're not amateurs, Janet." Victor learned from his mistakes over the years. "This compound is designed to keep trained operators out as much as it's designed to keep children in." Rebecca arrived as the sun was setting, her approach so quiet that even Carlos's heightened awareness barely detected her movement. She carried herself with the professional confidence of someone who'd learned to trust her skills through repeated success in high-stakes situations. "Perimeter security analysis complete." Rebecca reported, unfolding a tactical map marked with precise annotations. Motion sensors covering all obvious approach routes. Thermal cameras on rotating mounts. Guard towers positioned to probably overlapping fields of fire. Professional installation, probably military contractor work. Janet studied the compound layout, her tactical mind automatically calculating approach routes and extraction possibilities. The facility was built into a natural depression surrounded by elevated positions that provided excellent defensive fields of fire. A direct assault would be suicide, but a properly coordinated sniper attack supported by diversionary tactics. "Guard rotations?" Janet asked. "Every 6 hours with shift changes at 0600, 1200, 1800, and midnight," Carlos replied. "That's our best window for infiltration. But Janet, there's something else. Supply deliveries have increased by 400% in the last week. New personnel arriving daily. Whatever Victor's preparing for, it's going to happen soon." Rebecca pointed to a series of photographs showing heavy trucks entering the compound. Vehicle manifests suggest medical supplies, communications equipment, and enough MREs to feed a small army for months. Either he's preparing for a siege, or he's getting ready to deploy a lot of people very quickly. Janet's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Walker. "Intelligence indicates transport vehicles being prepared for movement tomorrow night. If the children are being relocated, this may be your only opportunity for intervention." The timeline had compressed beyond their ability to prepare properly. If Victor was preparing to move the children, they had perhaps 18 hours to mount a rescue operation. But rushing into a fortified compound without adequate reconnaissance was exactly the kind of mistake that got operators and civilians killed. "We move tonight," Janet decided. "Infiltration at midnight, synchronized with guard rotation change." Rebecca began distributing equipment from military-grade cases that spoke of serious preparation. Night vision optics suppressed weapons communication gear encrypted to military standards. But it was the final case that caught Janet's attention, medical supplies designed for treating traumatized children. Tranquilizers, Janet asked. Mild sedatives designed to calm kids who might panic during extraction, Carlos explained. Doctor friend of mine said terror could literally kill them if their systems are already compromised by whatever drugs Victor's been using. Janet pocketed several syringes, hoping they wouldn't be necessary but knowing they probably would be. Every aspect of this mission violated the principles of sound tactical planning. Too few operators, too many variables, too much that could go wrong. But the alternative was abandoning over 200 children to fates worse than death. As the team conducted final equipment checks, Janet's satellite phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed her own ranch number. Someone was at her home in Colorado using her landline to contact her. The secure connection crackled with interference as she answered. Hello, little Phoenix. The accent was unmistakably Russian, the voice carrying the kind of confidence that came from holding all the advantages. I think it's time we had a conversation. Viktor Kozlov, speaking from Janet's own home, sitting in her father's chair, surrounded by the memories and mementos that defined her life. The violation was personal, calculated to provoke exactly the kind of emotional response that led to tactical mistakes. I know you're listening, Victor continued, just as I know you're planning something stupid. Your friend Marcus provided such interesting information before he died. Yes, died. About an hour ago, actually. He lasted longer than I expected. I'll give him that. Your father trained him well. Janet's hand tightened on the phone, rage building behind the professional mask she'd learned to maintain under extreme stress. Marcus was dead. Her spotter, her partner. The man who tried to warn her about the truth had died in agony while she was planning a rescue that would now be nothing more than revenge. But Marcus wasn't the only one with interesting stories to tell. The children have been quite talkative, especially the younger ones. Did you know that some of them still remember their parents, their real names, the lives they had before I gave them purpose? It's fascinating how memory works, how much pain the human mind can hold before it simply breaks. Carlos moved toward the phone, his face twisted with paternal rage, but Janet held up a hand to stop him. Victor was baiting them, trying to provoke the kind of emotional response that would compromise their tactical planning. But Janet had learned something from her father's legacy that Victor had never understood. The coldest anger was often the most effective. You want to save them? Victor's voice carried a mocking tone that spoke of absolute confidence. Come and take them. Walk into my compound like the soldier you think you are, and maybe I'll let some of them live. Hide in the darkness like your father did, and everyone dies. Children, parents, anyone who's ever helped you. I have people in more places than you can imagine, little Phoenix. Your war ends when I say it ends. The connection died, leaving Janet alone with the weight of revelation and the certainty that everything had changed. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a trap designed specifically for her, baited with the lives of innocent children and the promise of answers she'd spent 5 years seeking. Rebecca and Carlos watched her face, waiting for orders that would define whether they lived or died in the next few hours. Janet looked at the tactical maps, the equipment, the faces of 2 soldiers who'd volunteered for a mission that had just become exponentially more dangerous. Mission parameters have changed, Janet announced. Victor knows we're coming. This is now a direct assault against a prepared enemy position. Anyone who wants to walk away, do it now. Rebecca checked her rifle's action with practiced efficiency. Ma'am, respectfully, where exactly would we walk? To those kids don't have anyone else. Carlos was already loading magazines with the methodical precision of a man who'd made peace with violence. Emia's in there. My little girl's depending on me to bring her home. Walking away isn't an option. Janet nodded, understanding that they'd crossed the line from tactical mission to personal crusade. It was exactly the kind of emotional commitment that led to either legendary victory or catastrophic failure. But sometimes the most important battles were fought not because they could be won, but because they couldn't be lost. Then we do this right, Janet said, professional, by the numbers. Victor wants to play games with children's lives. Let's show him what happens when the children have guardians who know how to play back. The ghost of Colorado was about to become something more dangerous than Viktor Kozlov could imagine. Not just a sniper seeking revenge, but a protector with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The children were waiting, and Janet Coulson had never missed a shot when innocent lives hung in the balance. The approach to Victor's compound required a 4-mile cross-country movement through terrain that offered minimal concealment. Janet led the 3-person team using techniques learned through a decade of operating in hostile territory. Every step was calculated, every sound evaluated for potential compromise. Behind her, Rebecca and Carlos moved with the silent efficiency of professionals who understood that detection meant death for them and the children they'd come to save. The compound's perimeter security was exactly as Carlos had described: professionally installed motion sensors, thermal cameras, and guard positions that overlap to eliminate dead spaces. But professional security created its own vulnerabilities for operators who understood how such systems function. Janet had spent her career exploiting the overconfidence of enemies who believed their technology made them invulnerable. The team reached their predetermined positions at 23:47 hours, 13 minutes before the midnight guard rotation. Janet's hide site on a ridgeline 1,500 meters from the compound provided excellent visibility into the facility's central courtyard, where Viktor Kozlov maintained his command center. Through her father's scope, she could see movement that suggested preparation for something significant: vehicles being loaded with supplies, personnel receiving final briefings, the kind of activity that preceded major operations. Rebecca's position, 800 meters to the east, covered the compound's main entrance and administrative buildings. Her scope revealed guards conducting routine patrols, their movements following patterns that spoke of dangerous complacency. Professional soldiers who'd been operating in a permissive environment too long, losing the edge that kept people alive in truly hostile territory. Carlos had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment: infiltration through the compound's drainage system, an approach that would allow him to locate his daughter and prepare the children for extraction. His mission was to identify Emma's location while gathering intelligence on guard positions inside the facility. It was the kind of job that required absolute silence and perfect timing. Janet's secure radio crackled with Carlos's voice at exactly midnight. "Overwatch, I'm inside." Multiple dormitory buildings, approximately 50 kids each. They're sedated but responsive. Some show signs of severe psychological conditioning. "Emma?" Janet asked. "Not yet, still searching." "But Janet, some of these kids have been here for years. They don't even remember their real names." Janet processed the tactical situation quickly. Multiple target buildings, each containing children who might resist rescue attempts. Limited time before the compound's communication failure was discovered. And somewhere in the maze of buildings, Viktor Kozlov was preparing to deploy child soldiers against targets that could be anywhere in the world. Rebecca's status: 6 guards visible on patrol routes, all carrying automatic weapons professional kit. 2 sniper positions on the eastern perimeter, both manned. They're good, but they're not expecting precision fire from this range. Janet's crosshairs settled on her first target, a guard tower that overlooked the compound's primary approach route. Through the Barrett's scope, she could see the sentry's face clearly: a professional soldier following routine procedures, unaware that death was approaching at over 3,000 feet per second. Janet's breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping, as muscle memory took control of functions her conscious mind couldn't manage under stress. The shot was textbook perfect. 1,400 meters through still desert air, the .50 caliber round striking precisely where Janet had intended. The guard dropped without a sound, his death unnoticed by colleagues who were about to discover they were fighting a ghost. Rebecca's first target fell moments later, a sniper positioned to cover the compound's eastern approach. 800 meters in variable wind, the shot requiring ballistic calculations that would challenge most professional marksmen. But Rebecca's bullet found its mark, eliminating a threat that could have killed Carlos during his movement to the dormitory buildings. Carlos's radio transmission came through with controlled urgency. "Found her. Emma's in Building C, northeast corner. Janet, they have done something to her. She doesn't recognize me." The words carried the weight of a father's worst nightmare. Carlos had found his daughter, but the child he'd lost was gone, replaced by something Victor's conditioning had created. It was the cruelest victory possible, rescuing a body while losing the soul that had made the mission meaningful. Janet's second shot eliminated a guard who was attempting to establish a communication with outside forces. Her third and fourth shots neutralized threats moving toward the children's dormitories. Each bullet was precisely placed, each death serving the larger purpose of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But it was movement in the compound's central courtyard that commanded Janet's full attention. Viktor Kozlov emerged from the command building, a figure she recognized from her father's classified files. Even at extreme range, she could see the confident stride of someone accustomed to controlling situations through violence and intimidation. But confidence became vulnerability when facing an opponent he couldn't see, couldn't threaten, couldn't negotiate with. Janet's crosshairs settled on Victor's center mass, her finger beginning the trigger squeeze that would end 20 years of systematic evil. But as her sight picture stabilized, she saw something that changed everything. Victor was flanked by children, some as young as 6 or 7, positioned to absorb any shot aimed at their captor. "I see you, Phoenix," Victor called into the darkness, his accented English carrying across the compound through speakers that turned his voice into a weapon of psychological warfare. "Robert Coulson's little girl come to finish Daddy's work, but you're too late. The children are already mine, and your friend Carlos is about to learn what happens when someone tries to take my property." Janet's radio erupted with the sound of automatic weapons fire from inside the compound. Carlos was under attack, his infiltration compromised at the worst possible moment. Through her scope, Janet could see muzzle flashes from Building C, where Emma was being held. "Carlos report. Pinned down. Multiple hostiles, unknown number. Emma's here, but she's... Jesus, Janet, she's fighting me. They've turned her into something else." The nightmare scenario every special operator dreaded: hostages who'd been turned into unwilling enemies. Children whose natural trust had been weaponized against themselves and those who loved them. The kind of situation where victory and defeat could be separated by split-second decisions made under impossible pressure. Rebecca's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Janet, I have multiple guards converging on Carlos's position. I can take some of them, but not all. He needs immediate support." Janet faced the defining choice of her career. She could maintain her Overwatch position and continue eliminating threats from a distance, providing the kind of precision fire support that might allow Carlos to escape. Or she could abandon tactical advantage and enter the compound, directly becoming just another target in a maze of buildings designed to channel attackers into killing zones. But as Janet watched Victor position more children as human shields, she realized that conventional tactics wouldn't work against an enemy who fought without honor. The children weren't just hostages. They were weapons programmed to resist rescue and protect their captors. Saving them would require something more than military precision. It would require the kind of sacrifice her father had been willing to make. "Rebecca, you have the compound," Janet transmitted. "Maintain Overwatch and provide fire support. I'm going in." "Janet, that's suicide. The crossfire will..." "Not if I'm fast enough." Janet slung the Barrett across her back and began moving toward the compound at a speed that prioritized momentum over stealth. Every instinct told her she was making a fatal mistake, abandoning the advantages that had kept her alive through dozens of missions. But sometimes the greatest courage was found in the willingness to become vulnerable for others. The compound's outer fence was designed to keep people in rather than out. Janet breached it in seconds, using techniques learned in urban warfare training that emphasized speed over subtlety. Alarms began sounding as motion sensors detected her movement, but by then she was already inside the perimeter, moving toward Building C with the focused intensity of someone who had accepted that death was a possibility, but failure wasn't an option. Victor's voice echoed through the compound speakers. "How noble little Phoenix, walking into my trap to save a man who's already lost his daughter. Did you really think love was stronger than conditioning, that a father's voice could overcome years of careful programming?" Janet reached Building C as Carlos's ammunition ran out. Through thermal imaging, she could see him cornered in a room with a small figure that could only be Emma. The child was armed and maintaining a defensive position that suggested professional training. Carlos was trying to talk to her, but Janet could see from the girl's posture that words weren't reaching whatever consciousness remained. The building's interior was a maze of corridors designed to disorient intruders and channel them into prepared killing zones. Janet moved through it with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile architecture through necessity rather than preference. Each corner presented potential death, each doorway a tactical problem that required instant solution. She found Carlos bleeding from multiple wounds, his weapon empty, facing a daughter who no longer recognized him as anything other than a threat. Emma held an assault rifle with mechanical precision, her finger positioned on the trigger as she'd been trained. But her eyes held something that gave Janet Hope confusion, as if competing programs were fighting for control of her conditioned responses. Emma, Janet said softly, approaching with empty hands visible. My name is Janet. I knew your father before you were born. He used to tell everyone about his little girl who loved horses and wanted to be a veterinarian. The rifle wavered slightly, Emma's programming encountering information it hadn't been designed to process. Janet continued talking, using details Carlos had shared during their deployments together, building a bridge to memories that conditioning hadn't been able to erase completely. He said you had a horse named Thunder, a paint horse with a white star on his forehead. You taught him to bow when you said please. Emma's finger moved away from the trigger, her young face showing the first signs of recognition. But the momentary breakthrough was shattered by Victor's voice over the building's intercom. Activate Protocol 7. Eliminate all threats. The words triggered something deeper than conscious thought. Emma's training reasserted itself, the rifle swinging back toward Janet with mechanical precision. But Janet had been expecting the moment when words would fail, when only action could bridge the gap between what the child had been forced to become and who she'd been born to be. Janet's tackle was perfectly timed, intercepting Emma before she could fire while ensuring the child wasn't injured in the process. The assault rifle clattered across the floor as Janet pinned the girl gently but firmly, speaking in the calm tones she'd once used to talk wounded soldiers through medical procedures. It's okay, Emma. You're safe now. Your daddy's here and we're going to take you home. Carlos crawled toward them, his wounds forgotten in the face of finally holding his daughter again. Emma's struggles gradually weakened as the sound of her father's voice began to penetrate, conditioning that was already fracturing under the stress of competing imperatives. But their reunion was interrupted by an explosion that shook the entire building. Victor had triggered demolition charges designed to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. The compound was becoming a death trap, with exits blocked by debris and fires spreading through buildings that had become furnaces. Janet's radio crackled with Rebecca's urgent transmission. Multiple explosions across the compound, structural collapse in buildings A and D. You need to get out now. Janet looked around the room, calculating escape routes that were rapidly disappearing. The main corridor was blocked by debris. The windows were too small for adult passage, and the ceiling was beginning to sag under the weight of damaged structural supports. They were trapped in a burning building with a traumatized child and a wounded Marine facing odds that defied solution through conventional means. But Janet Coulson had never been conventional. Looking at Emma's face, seeing the flickering recognition of someone fighting to remember who she'd been before the monsters found her, Janet made the decision that would define the rest of her life. She wasn't going to let Victor win. Not today. Not ever. Carlos, can you carry Emma? If it means getting her out of here, I can carry anything. Janet moved to the room's exterior wall, studying its construction with the analytical eye of someone who'd learned to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. The wall was concrete block, sturdy, but not reinforced. More importantly, it faced away from the compound's central courtyard, potentially providing an escape route that Victor's demolition plan hadn't accounted for. The Barrett M82 wasn't designed for breaching operations, but at close range, its 50 caliber rounds could punch through materials that would stop smaller weapons. Janet positioned herself carefully, calculating angles that would create an opening without bringing the ceiling down on their heads. The first shot blew a hole through the concrete blocks large enough for a person to squeeze through. The second and third shots expanded the opening to allow rapid egress. But as Janet prepared to lead Emma and Carlos to safety, Victor's voice echoed through the compound one final time. You cannot stop what has already begun, Phoenix. My network extends across continents. The children you think you're saving have already been replaced by others. Kill me, and 10 more will take my place. Through the hole she'd created, Janet could see Victor standing in the courtyard, surrounded by children who'd been positioned as human shields. He was challenging her to the kind of personal confrontation that ego demanded, but tactics discouraged. It was exactly the kind of mistake she'd been trained to avoid. But as Janet looked at Emma Rodriguez, seeing a child who'd been turned into a weapon by a monster who traded in innocence, she realized that some battles couldn't be won through tactics alone. Sometimes justice required the kind of personal risk that transformed soldiers into something more than mere warriors. Get Emma to the extraction point, Janet told Carlos. Rebecca will provide overwatch for your movement. What about you? Janet was already moving toward the courtyard, her father's rifle ready for the shot that would end Victor's reign of terror. I have unfinished business. The courtyard was a killing ground designed to favor defenders over attackers. Elevated positions provided multiple angles of fire, while open space offered no concealment for approaching enemies. It was exactly the kind of terrain Janet had been trained to avoid, the kind of tactical nightmare that ended careers and lives. But Victor had made one critical miscalculation. He assumed Janet was motivated by the same emotional factors that drove most operators: the need to be seen as heroic, the desire for personal confrontation with evil, the satisfaction that came from face-to-face victory over worthy opponents. But Janet had learned something different from her father's legacy. Sometimes the greatest courage was found in the precision of distant violence. Janet's positioning for the final shot required movement that exposed her to return fire from multiple directions. But as she settled into a shooting stance at the courtyard's edge, she felt the kind of clarity that came only in moments when training experience and moral certainty aligned perfectly. Through her scope, Victor's face filled the reticle. At 200 meters, it was almost too close for the Barrett's massive power. But the shot wasn't just about distance, it was about precision. Victor was surrounded by children, each one a potential casualty if Janet's aim was even slightly off target. Come closer, little phoenix, Victor taunted. Let me see the face of Robert Coulson's daughter when she realizes she can't save everyone. Let me show you what your father felt when he understood he'd failed. Janet's finger found the trigger muscle memory, guiding her through the final preparations for a shot that would either end a monster's reign or create more innocent victims. But as her sight picture stabilized, she saw something that changed the entire nature of the confrontation. Emma Rodriguez had escaped from Carlos and was running toward Victor, her conditioned responses driving her to protect the man who destroyed her childhood. The little girl was heading directly into Janet's line of fire, her presence making the shot impossible without risking the very life they'd come to save. Janet's training told her to abort the shot, to wait for a cleaner opportunity that might never come. But her father's journal had taught her something more important than tactical perfection. Sometimes protecting innocence required accepting imperfect solutions. Janet shifted her aim to Victor's shoulder, a non-lethal shot that would disable him without risking Emma's life. The bullet struck exactly where intended, spinning Victor around and dropping him to his knees. But the impact also scattered the children he'd been using as shields, creating the chaos Janet needed to finish what her father had started. Rebecca's voice crackled over the radio. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south, looks like reinforcements. The mission was rapidly deteriorating beyond their ability to control. Victor was wounded but still alive, his network intact and his reinforcements minutes away. The children were scattered across a burning compound, many too traumatized to understand they were being rescued. And Janet was trapped in an exposed position with limited ammunition and no clear escape route. But as Emma Rodriguez ran toward Victor's fallen form, Janet saw something that gave her hope. The little girl wasn't following her conditioning anymore. She was crying the natural emotional response of a child who'd finally been allowed to feel fear and confusion instead of artificial purpose. Carlos reached his daughter first, scooping her into arms that had waited 4 months to hold her again. Emma's resistance was minimal, her fight finally ending as she recognized the voice that had sung her to sleep for 8 years before the monster stole her away. Janet provided covering fire as Rebecca advanced on Victor's position. The human trafficker was attempting to reach a pistol that lay just beyond his wounded arm. His face twisted with the kind of rage that came from having absolute power suddenly stripped away. "You've won nothing," Victor gasped as Rebecca secured his weapon. "The children will never be normal again. The network will continue. Other men will take my place, and they'll be harder to find, harder to stop." Janet approached Victor's position, her rifle aimed at his center mass. At close range, without the scope's magnification, she could see the face of the man who'd killed her father, destroyed countless families, and turned innocent children into weapons. He was smaller than she'd expected, more human than the monster her imagination had created. Your father begged, Victor whispered through bloodied lips. Begged me to spare you. Said you were just a child yourself, that you didn't deserve to pay for his interference. But children grow up, don't they? Children become threats. Janet's finger tightened on the trigger, the pressure building toward the release that would end 20 years of systematic evil. Justice demanded Victor's death. Vengeance required it. Military efficiency dictated it. But in the moment before firing, Janet remembered something her father had written in his final journal entry. The greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's becoming better than they are. Janet lowered her weapon. You're going to live, she said. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison, knowing that every child you damaged will grow up free because you failed. That's a worse punishment than any bullet could provide. The extraction took 6 hours, coordinated with federal agencies that Walker had contacted during the operation. 237 children were recovered, along with intelligence that would lead to the dismantling of Victor's entire network. Evidence gathered from the compound resulted in arrests across 3 continents and the rescue of hundreds of additional victims. Carlos Rodriguez retired from the Marines to focus on helping Emma recover from her trauma. The little girl's healing would take years, requiring patience and love that only a father could provide. But she was surrounded by support from people who understood that recovery was possible when caring adults refused to abandon hope. Rebecca Sterling accepted a position with a joint task force dedicated to combating human trafficking, using her skills to protect children who couldn't protect themselves. Her experience in Victor's compound had taught her that some battles were too important to fight alone. Janet returned to Colorado, but not to the isolation she'd known before. The ranch became a sanctuary for rescued children who needed time to heal, in a place where silence meant safety instead of abandonment. Her father's study was converted into a therapy room where trained counselors helped young minds process trauma that no child should ever experience. The Barrett M82 returned to its place of honor in the gun safe, its mission complete, but its legacy continuing. Janet's shooting career was over, but her war was just beginning. A different kind of war, fought with patience instead of bullets, healing instead of violence, hope instead of vengeance. On quiet Colorado evenings, when the children were sleeping safely in beds that couldn't be taken away, Janet would visit her father's grave and tell him about the lives they'd saved together. Colonel Coulson's dream of a world where children could grow up protected from predators was still far from complete, but every morning brought new proof that some victories were worth any price. That's my father's rifle, Janet would tell visitors who asked about the weapon mounted in the main hall. It's the rifle that taught me the difference between taking life and protecting it. The rifle that finished the war my father started. The rifle that proves sometimes the hardest shot to take is the one you don't fire. The children never asked about the rifle's history, and Janet never offered details they weren't ready to hear. Instead, she taught them about the Colorado wilderness, about horses and hiking, and the kind of quiet courage that didn't require weapons. She taught them that safety was possible, that adults could be trusted, that nightmares eventually ended when good people refused to let evil win. Viktor Kozlov died in federal prison 2 years later, his network dismantled, and his legacy reduced to case studies in law enforcement academies. Janet attended the funeral not to celebrate his death, but to witness the final chapter of a story that had defined her family's service. The man who'd killed her father was gone, but the children he tried to destroy were growing up free. Emma Rodriguez graduated from high school with honors and enrolled in veterinary school, her childhood dream finally within reach. She still struggled with nightmares, still required therapy to process memories that conditioning had tried to erase. But she was alive, she was free, and she was surrounded by people who loved her for who she was rather than what she'd been forced to become. The ghost of Colorado had put down her rifle, but she'd found something better than vengeance. She'd found redemption, the kind that came not from perfect shots, but from imperfect humans choosing to do better than the world expected. Some warriors carried rifles, but the wisest warriors knew when to set them down. Janet Coulson's war was over. Her life was just beginning. And somewhere in the Colorado mountains, children who'd survived the darkest evil imaginable were learning to laugh again, protected by a woman who'd discovered that the greatest victory wasn't defeating your enemies, but becoming the kind of person who could help others heal from what those enemies had done. The phoenix had risen from the ashes of her father's sacrifice, not to bring destruction, but to nurture new life. And in the end, that was the most impossible shot of all, choosing hope over hatred, healing over revenge, love over the easy satisfaction of justified violence. The ghost of Montana had found peace at last.